Welcome, everyone, to Wizards and Warp Drives, the podcast where grown-ass men get deeply nerdy about the things they love. My name's Nacho, and joining me, as per usual, is the mighty glue stick himself, AJ Pickett,
Hello.
and Fred from How to RPG.
Hi.
Morning.
Morning.
How are we all? All good?
Yeah.
Busy week?
It's been a forgettable week, really, aside from work, as it is, when you don't have much else going on. Mind you, a lot of progress on projects and stuff, and a pretty good video on the lizard folk tribes of Australia. Well, fantasy Australia, Aussie, and the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, I saw that you were still doing those Aussie monsters.
Yep, all month.
All month, which
Aussie
means
month.
which means he will have keyed in and have his homebrew monsters for a monster book ready to go.
That's right.
Rearing and ready to go.
There's always like 2 tasks that I'm doing with every bit of work that I'm doing. The work smarter, not harder thing.
Yeah.
And Fred has now officially become part-time, so he is going to focus on more things that he likes.
No, he's now a full-time author and a part-time worker for other people.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to wind up being, at least initially, a part-time illustrator, which is weird. It's really, really weird, but that's all right.
Bit of jack of all trades. It's a small company, a publishing outfit of Fred, Wally, and AJ and others. Yeah,
it's cool, man.
At least we've got one project that we seem to be reasonably focused on right now, which is good news.
Well, we've got 2.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah,
we've got an RPG and a supplement, so that's covering all the bases, I think.
Yeah, and a monster book that was in the works at some point.
I'm going on record to say that I'm never going to manufacture miniatures, even though I could, because it's too much hassle. I learned my lesson from doing the old Silicon Battle Mass. It's just like, manufacturing's a pain. I can't imagine doing like a board game with thousands of pieces that have to go into hundreds of pieces that have to go into the box specifically, and you have to, everyone has to be manufactured and instructed on where it's going specifically, and then quality control. Meanwhile, you're trying to communicate with China, and your communication's getting cut off on Facebook or whatever every 5 minutes. It's really annoying. China doesn't do itself any favors in that regard. It's like, make it easier to work with you, please.
And it's just the logistics of it as well.
Yeah, I don't care about the politics or what your policy of your country is. I'm just trying to get money, stuff done, and there's nowhere else I can go to get it manufactured, which is a problem when you think about it. Imagine if China collapses, our RP industry is on its ass. Who's going to be making all the books and stuff?
Well, all the companies and countries that had companies in them that were making books will wind up slowly but surely respawning as new companies.
Yeah, you would hope.
That's exactly what would happen. Yeah. It would happen. And print on demand.
True. Yeah. What we need is a printer that binds the book into a softcover book as well. That'd be great.
All right, should we get into this week's subject?
Talking of books.
Yep. Yeah. All right. I made a little intro. So, in the early 80s was a period of boundless fantasy. Crystals were dark, stories were never-ending, and everyone spent a lot of time trying to solve Nick Kershaw's riddle. But perhaps the greatest step forward in fantasy fiction was when it started to fight back. The Fighting Fantasy series was a groundbreaking blend of game and book by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. For us, these books became our gateway into a more immersive world of role-playing. So, we're going to talk about fighting fantasy books, which I believe is pretty much all of our introduction into this hobby that has become an obsession in our lives.
Yeah, pretty much. I have to push my glasses up and say, well, actually, right away.
Yeah.
Fighting fantasy was not the start of choose your own adventure books. There's some literary academics who have a post hoc opinion that there's this 1940s book that was really about quantum mechanics more than anything, that talks about multiple worlds and multiple choices existing simultaneously. That was the first time it was mentioned. And they sometimes put that as inspiration behind choose your own adventure books or adventure books, or as they call them, interactive books, or interactive adventures, which is actually, they named that before we came out with all the electronic stuff we have today. So it's not really accurate, because a video game is an interactive adventure. So I call them, adventure books. So the genesis of those is the guy who created Choose Your Own Adventure books. And that was Edward Packard. He was educated at Princeton University over in the States. He wrote his first style of this book. It wasn't the Choose Your Own Adventure. It was called Candyland, or something like that, or the sugar something or other. I haven't read those ones, and not a lot of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, but there were lots. There's like 50 of the sort of young adult ones, and then there's another 20 or more for younger people. And that is a case for quite often, like there's a lot of different titles through all the different publishers. So yeah, the Choose Your Own Adventure thing. But Fighting Fantasy sort of stands out because it's more a game than a book, and that your character has stats. You roll dice, you fight. There's a chance that you can die. So it's different in that in Choose Your Own Adventure books you don't have those character sheet sort of things, and you don't have combat situations where, well, you do, but it's narrated. You don't roll dice and stuff like that. So
yeah, I would say that's true. I think there is another distinguishing aspect to the Choose Your Path adventures, and the Fighting Fantasy that really made it stand out for me, because I couldn't care less about those earlier books. I found some of them in the library at college, and they were written for teenagers.
Yep.
They were sanitized. They weren't really particularly hardcore, but Fighting Fantasy, Warlock of Firetop Mountain, Deathtrap Dungeon, and Citadel of Chaos was really very, very adult. And I think when my mum discovered what was inside those books when we got them, she was like, "Oh, shite. What is going on here? Why are you reading this?" And we're like, "Because it's cool. We want the naughty stuff."
It was so metal where the covers were just
so metal. Yeah. Don't give us stuff written for a teenager. We want the adult stuff. Thank you very much. So that's what stood out for me.
Yeah,
I've got a brief history on it. So in the late 70s, Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston's company Games Workshop secured the exclusive rights to Dungeons and Dragons in the UK, growing their influence into the tabletop gaming world. At a gaming convention in 1979, Penguin Books editor Geraldine Cook approached Jackson and Livingston, initially asking them to write an introduction to role-playing games. But instead, they kind of pitched it as a solo game book that would give the readers a role-playing experience, blending storytelling with game mechanics. Penguin actually rejected the idea and actually found it laughable.
Yeah.
So after years of persistence, Cook pitched it to Puffin, which was like Penguin's children's imprint. They saw the potential in the idea, especially for readers aged 9 to 12. The original title for the book was The Magic Quest. And Ian Livingston actually, at one point, approached the Tolkien estate to see if they would be interested in publishing Lord of the Rings themed game books. The offer was declined, which Livingston later felt was a positive outcome as it allowed for the series to develop its own identity.
Yeah.
And in 1982, we got the release of The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, the first Fighting Fantasy game book, which I think because it was published through Puffin, which were basically had some sort of influence with the schools around that area. It was getting into the hands of a demographic, and it was also around the same time as that Satanic Panic was going on in the States.
Yeah.
So for me, I know that my experience was that all the teenagers my age found these books in the library, and you could not get them out. You would have to hunt down the person who had taken the book out that you wanted to get a hold of from the library, then have a little discussion with them and just make an arrangement so that when they returned the book, you were standing right there so you could then borrow the book straight away. Otherwise, you could never get hold of the sodding thing. So a lot of deals and bribery was involved around the library to get hold of these books. And because of the art and because of the stories, really were not written for a 9 or 12-year-old.
No.
We all wanted them. So, yes, there was a lot of bribery taking place. And fortunately, the libraries had a relationship and a catalogue that was part of the Puffin publisher. And so you could purchase these books. So a lot of us were eventually not finding that we could get the books from the library. So we wind up trying to convince our parents to buy them for us so that we could read them. And we would read them more than once, quite a few times.
Yeah.
One of the things that really appeals about the Fighting Fantasy books is the artwork of Russ Nicholson. Scottish guy who moved to England and lived there the rest of his life. He died in 2023, so quite recently. But he also published, he did the artwork in the first couple of books, and then about another, 15 or so of the books. He also did the art for the Fiend Folio for Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, including the cover art. So we should all know who Russ Nicholson is, and
he was the interior artist, I believe, not the cover artist. Yeah,
he also did a load of artwork, including the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay books, Warhammer 40k, and his illustrations in White Dwarf magazine were just synonymous. So in many ways, his artwork really defines the style of 1980s British sci-fi and fantasy to me.
Yeah, but he also did actually do some cover artwork. He did 4 books in the Fighting Fantasy.
Sorry,
but no, don't be sorry. The thing with him is he was probably the best of the artists, in my opinion. Yeah, and when his art was not there, you noticed it.
Yeah,
and frankly, a lot of my friends at school and colleagues and even me, we were pissed when that artwork disappeared.
The first one that I didn't really like was the Space Citadel, or like the space themed one. It was kind of like a out of the blue, because I was used to like the fantasy, Forest of Doom and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, but it was a very diverse title, like the range of stories. You never knew what you're going to get with Fighting Fantasy books, which is really interesting. They were exploring different things.
One of the artists as well, which I found out during my research, Ian McCraig. So he's probably most known as the cover artist for Forest of Doom, City of Thieves, and Deathtrap Dungeon. He also is the head designer for Darth Maul from Star Wars.
Huh. Wow. What a twisted little industry we live in, eh? You never know what somebody's worked on or is working on.
So a lot of the artists for the Fighting Fantasy series were not traditionally teenage artist illustrators or even children artist illustrators. There was a combination of very adult, like literally porn. A lot of them were actually tied in, not all of them, but there was a couple in there. And so some very, very sort of more mature, a bit more hardcore, which is why it comes out in the illustrations, because Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston were very, I guess, strong on the fact that they wanted the illustration, particularly the cover artwork, but also what was inside, to capture people's attention, to actually pick up the book. And then the best way to do that with a teenager is to put something in front of them that looked really, really naughty and really, really gruesome and gross. So
it did start a gamebook boom. So obviously we did get Choose Your Own Adventure, which was Edward Packard and Ray R. Montgomery, which I think they based that on, he used to get his kid to tell bedtime stories, and he would get his kid to determine where the story went, and that was how that idea generated. And we also got one from TSR, which came out the same year, called Endless Quest. But none of those books had game mechanics. They were just simple, go to this page, go to this page.
Yeah. The final evolution of the game mechanics, I think, came with the Fantasy Lands, or the Fabled Lands, which is another... so the artist worked on that as well. That was later on in the early 90s, mid-90s. And there were a greater number of sections in the book, so like from 680 to about 1,200 sections. So they were big books, and it was more free roaming. So you could choose where you started on a map and go from there. So they had multiple storylines which crossed over. It was very complex.
They definitely
much
got
more
complicated.
much more of a solo role-playing game.
And that's really what Fighting Fantasy and the Pick a Path Adventures was really an analog solo role-playing game. That's exactly what they were. Where if you didn't have people to play with, and I didn't back then, you played with yourself and with a book. I mean,
yeah, but the amount of complexity in those Fablelands books, Lou, was like there was trade, marketplace goods.
I see where the porn comment came from.
Well, yeah. You could get houses and ships. You could discover new lands through keywords. You had consistency between the different books with your character. The character was on a fold-out character sheet. So, yeah, it was much more a role-playing game. But yeah.
So in the Gamebook boom, obviously, after the success of Warlock of Firetop Mountain, that was the first one that they wrote together, Jackson and Livingstone. But then they separated. They focused on 2 books each. Jackson did Citadel of Chaos and Starship Traveller. Livingstone did Forest of Doom and City of Thieves. And then it started to get massively international success, so it started going around the world. Weirdly, France is one of the most popular places for fighting fantasy. It's never gone out of print in France. And Japan, they in 1986 they went on this like lavish press tour where they were almost treated like rock stars in Japan. Which is unheard of for like fantasy authors. They then kind of expanded, and they stepped back and became more producers of the books, and they hired authors to start writing the books instead. And I think they were focusing on other products. And just the turnaround, they did 59. I believe there were 59 fighting fantasy books from 82 to 95. So they were just pushing these things out.
I think it was about two a month. We didn't have to wait long for the next one. They were really sort of adamant that we could not make teenagers wait too long for the next one, and that was probably a smart move.
It's a pity that they didn't have those through the books in schools program that we had in New Zealand here.
They did.
Did they?
Yeah, it was part of books in schools. That's where I got them from. We couldn't get them out of the library. There was only 3, I think. The Warlock of Firetop Mountain was in the library. We had the Deathtrap Dungeon, and we had the Citadel of Chaos, and they were always out, as I said. And so the only way to get them was to buy them as part of the books in schools. That's how I got them, and a lot of my friends did too. Like we would have.
I love getting that catalogue of books and like tick tick. Yeah,
it's so
just catalogues of. Sorry. Warlock of Firetop Mountain was a mess. I don't know if people realize this, but the first one, even though it was, the first in the series, and it was a giant mess because it'd been written by 2 different people, and when they put it together, it was just dynamite. Like it didn't work, and written 2 different writing styles, and they had used a different fighting combat system as well. It was all a bit of a botch up, but they did eventually connect it together so it made a bit more sense. And if you're wondering what the heck they used to do, they used to draw up a map, and they used the map to sort of determine the choices, and then they would draw write out the thing, and it would be like this huge piece of paper and a flow chart. This was just like branching all over the place. So
Jackson also expanded on another. He started another series which introduced magic called Sorcery.
That was a lot later on, though. That took a while, and I think probably the best series that they ever put out, because they were written for an adult rather than for a teenager, which meant teenagers loved them. It did not sell well, though. The problem is
in 1984, the Warlock of Firetop Mountain got a different route ending. When they published 2 issues of Warlock magazine, they changed one of the endings. So so that was interesting.
And we got not spin-off series, but of books that were influenced by it, like Lone Wolf was very popular, which I think that was because it was a continuous narrative. It was kind of more like where fighting fantasy was very standalone, even though it was a lot of it wasn't a shared world. You didn't necessarily need to read one before the other, whereas Lone Wolf was the first kind of solo campaign. And another one I never heard of before, but Way of the Tiger, which was a martial arts themed one.
So the independent ones were Graham Davis wrote The Crystal Maze after the UK TV series. The Way of the Tiger was a ninja themed RPG game that was by Mark Smith and Jamie Thompson. That was a one-off. Sagar the Barbarian had Gary Gygax as a co-author. But the most famous lines were probably the Twister plot. The guy R.I. Stein, who did the Goosebumps books, wrote some of those. He also did some of the books in Wizards, Warriors, and You by Berkeley Books. That was 18 books in that one, and Twister Plot had 18 books. There was the Virtual Reality Adventure by Penguin Books, which was, again, Jamie Thompson. That was more aimed at older warriors and cyberpunk sci-fi, and there were 6 of those. Which Way Books by Archway Books, the Graphics Books by Hippo Books, Be an Interplanetary Spy by Bantams and Skylark, which had 12 titles. Then there's Pathway to Adventure by Scholastic, that had 10. And yeah, Time Machine by Bantam Books, 25 titles there. And Endless Quest by TSR, where it was 50 books. Lone Wolf had 32, I think. And Finding Fantasy had 70 books, tons.
Yeah. I always kind of wonder what the heck was going on and why it worked at that particular time. And I was just trying to think really hard about, historically, why were my friends at, in my age, and why was I so interested in it? And it was primarily because the basic idea is that you were the main hero. You were the main character in the story or adventure. You got to make the choices throughout it. And there was a final climax that you get to be part of, And it was actually, I'm sure it was definitely the fact that death was common, like fighting monsters and you get killed. Traps, die. Try to solve a puzzle, don't get it right, die. Make the wrong decision, die. It could get frustrating because some of those early books are really hard.
Yeah.
Even with the skill, stamina, and luck system and the 6-sided dice, it was really, I think it was right down to the fact that you were part of it. It was like the early digital video game for me.
Like
because
Rogue.
I didn't have video games back then,
And you couldn't
afford it.
And you couldn't cheat. You couldn't just get frustrated and jump on your phone and find the correct path.
No cheat sheets back then. No walkthroughs. I think mainly in New Zealand, particularly for me in the town that I was growing up in, you had it seemed like the entire world was dead set on making you an ex-rugby player, alcoholic old man, probably a real estate agent. That seemed to be the path that the education system wanted to put me on. I wasn't interested in team sports, and there were very, very little support for any sort of outside of school learning, any sort of educational, self-educational writing, creativity. No, those weren't really considered. So yeah, it was grim. And as a creative person who was very curious and had grown up with my dad's shelf of 1940s to 1960s sci-fi, I was craving something to sink my teeth into, something that was for my generation, not just old people, because that was all old stuff. Like I'm reading about 1940s and 1960s and stuff. So it was and it was a very mundane time. It was a very non-sci-fi, non-fantasy time. It was really boring. Like coming out of the 70s, 80s, it was just dull. It was a dull, tan, mustard-colored world.
There was Star Wars, but people, I don't think a lot of people realize that before Star Wars, any kind of sci-fi and fantasy was B-grade, C-grade movie with a tiny budget that really wasn't that good. And if they could make it a good movie, it was generally because they showed you as little as possible, so it wasn't so expensive. Special effects was not even after Star Wars, people really couldn't make that sort of stuff. There was so many rip-offs and so forth.
Like 2001 Space Odyssey, Star Wars, E.T., those movies blew people's socks off. Like we can't overstate how much it changed the psyche of fantasy and sci-fi. That blasted it into the mainstream. Like it was acceptable to like E.T. and have E.T. toys and stuff. Star Wars just merged everything. So Star Wars memorabilia and stuff was everywhere. Everybody had lunchboxes of Space 1999 and schools and stickers from this, and they were a club, some magazine club that they wrote away from and got like a ring or something from.
I think Final Fantasy just felt like it wasn't really for us. Like it shouldn't have been for us. It felt a lot more adult and a lot more metal, and like that was the appeal. And it had a formula, that just worked. It must have, the way they just produced those books. They obviously the way they, Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson must have sat down with these other writers and said, this is the formula of how you do this. And just for that turnaround, because I think 400 sections was there. Because I always remember if you get to section 400, you'd won.
Yeah,
that always stays in my memory. So, and that was usually the last chapter.
Yeah,
and like it was a time before video games, and you couldn't cheat. So, yeah, and
you
like
kind of cheat. You could stick your finger in the page as you turn to the next option and see what's best. You know, that's that's about the cheating you would do.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And they just had a distinctive style as well. They just stood out in the bookshelves. And it was simple mechanics. What was it? Skill, stamina, and luck. You only had three stats.
They added in other things later on, but it was still just 2 6-sided dice. That was it.
Yep. It had a shared world, and there was diverse books, and there was obviously books that had more horror themes and sci-fi themes, but the majority of them were fantasy books that were set in the world of Titan. And and some of them had there were shared connections to them.
Not as much as Lone Wolf was really it's the one that stands out as being a real world building thing, and like real consistency between it. Like you're a member of a monastic order that learns magic and martial arts and stuff, and you're on a mission, like a serious mission through all the books. So yeah, Magnamund. I always remember those names of those places. You learn the names of the towns on the map.
I think the titles of the books as well were just metal. You know, they weren't overcomplicated. They just Talisman of Death and Forest of Doom and City of
House
Thieves
of Hell.
Yeah,
Space Assassin.
They don't
Temple
fuck
of
around.
Terror.
They just got to the point. You knew what you were getting, like this metal ass title and a metal ass cover, and
When you pick up your kid's book and they're reading, you know, Appointment with Fear or Rebel Planet, and you're like, okay, this is not educational.
Well, the problem was, let's get real. The problem was when I was growing up and I was looking for books to read that I could manage. One, I was transitioning from comic books because I had a lot of trouble reading when I was a kid, and you just couldn't find anything. I mean, I read The Hobbit, but reading Lord of the Rings was just a mission. I mean, just getting through the grammar and the size.
I only made it through 2 books. I never read the Return of the King. I got through like the tussock and endless trudging through the 2 towers just got me in the end. I just couldn't handle it. He really did. You know, there was a certain weeding out process in reading those books. Like, it is an achievement to read the Lord of the Rings novels.
Yeah, I read Dragonlance before Lord of the Rings, and Dragonlance, Lord of the Rings felt like a slog after Dragonlance because Dragonlance was so like breezy and horny. There was action all the time. Every chapter had some action in it.
Back in the day when we had half elves, remember then those days?
I think I read the first 3 Dragonlance books, and then the next one came out, and then I was like, oh god, I didn't know what had changed. I couldn't even point my finger as to what had happened. Was it because
you got laid?
I don't know. It's just
all of a sudden it just lost its appeal.
It's lost its appeal. It's like somebody else was writing them, and maybe that was what was going on.
Chronicles and Legends still hold up, but you might have, if you jump to something like Tales, which were all kind of like the prequels and little off stories and stuff, they didn't. They started getting other writers in, and they didn't feel like they were in the same tone.
They're like, that's what they were. Anyway, but that was the problem.
It's a beloved hit and miss franchise.
There were not enough really cool fantasy science fiction books out there that you know you could sort of chew your way through as a teenager, and you didn't want the, you know, the adult writing style, which is sometimes really hard to understand because it was just a bit too high up. But you did want the themes and the stories and the death and the guts and the sex and all the other things that went with it. You just didn't want to have to try to figure out how grammar worked, or whatever their idea of grammar was like, because it was just too hard. But the fighting fantasy books, I don't know about you, but I think they started to fall apart when Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone were not writing them anymore. I think the first 10 books are pretty good. between the 10 and 20, it's really starting to go downhill. Not
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. The naming got less as well, sort of less inspirational near the end, I noticed. There's a lot of undead.
Yeah. You got
a lot of vampires.
Island of the Undead, Revenge of the Vampire, Spectral Stalkers, The Keep of the Lich Lord.
I've got all 59 titles here.
Right. Bolt of the Vampire. Oh, maybe the Revenge of the Vampire was after the Bolt of the Vampire.
We got Warlock of Firetop Mountain, Citadel of Chaos, The Forest of Doom, Starship Traveler, City of Thieves, Deathtrap Dungeon, Island of the Lizard King, Scorpion Swamp. Scorpion Swamp was written by the American Steve Jackson. Do you remember that? Yeah.
I actually really like the Island of the Lizard King. That was one of my favorites. Apart from Deathtrap Dungeon, I think it's one of my favorites because I just love the premise of like,
that's
why are you going into this thing for money?
That's a trilogy as well. Deathtrap Dungeon.
It's really hard. That one. It's really, really difficult.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Then we got Caverns of the Snow Witch, House of Hell, Talisman of Death. Which
you got to stop there, man. Look, I never really liked the House of Hell, but
that's a modern one, wasn't it? That was in our time.
But it was basically, you
don't like horror.
One of the scariest ones under the sun, man. It was terrifying. And like, how the hell did they manage to make a book about a thing like breaking down on the side of the road, going to a house, and then getting involved in a whole lot of dark nonsense?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, I couldn't. The first time I read it through, and I'm like, oh, I can't do this again.
What's scary?
It was so terrifying.
Scaring me the most about this list is all those titles I've read so far are just from 1982 to 1984. So this is a 2-year period of books coming out. That's crazy.
House of Hell introduced fear points, which is something they had an appointment with fear and Sword of the Samurai. That was a mechanic they threw in there.
Next we got Talisman of Death, which is probably one of my favorite covers. I don't know why I like that cover. It just looked pretty cool. Space Assassin, Freeway Fighter, which I think was that the Mad Max? That was the Mad Max one, eh?
Yeah, one of my favorites, that one.
Temple of Terror, The Rings of Kether, Caesar Blood, Appointment with Fear, Rebel Planet. We're now at 1986, so this is this is only 3 years of books.
Okay, if you call them all out, 9 of them. Just keep going, man.
Demons of the Deep, Sword of the Samurai, Trial of the Champions, which was the sequel to Deathtrap Dungeon. Robot Commando. This is where the names, I think, started to get a little bit less imaginative. Robot Commando, Masks of Mayhem, Creatures of Havoc, Beneath Nightmare Castle, Crypt of the Sorcerer, Star Strider, Phantoms of Fear, Midnight Rogue, Chasms of Malice, Battle Blade Warrior, Slaves of the Abyss, Skylord, Stealer of Souls, Daggers of Darkness, Armies of Death, Portals of Evil, Vault of the Vampire, Fangs of Fury, Dead of the Night, Masters of Chaos. Why does that feel like it's repeating? Black Vein Prophecy, The Keep of the Lich Lord, Legends of the Shadow Warriors, Spectral Stalkers, Towers of Destruction, The Crimson Tide, Moonrunner, Siege of Sardath, Return to Firetop Mountain, 1992.
Yeah,
that was a very good
I think that was Ian Livingston's first book in a long time.
Yep.
Island of the Undead, Night Dragon, Spellbreaker, Legend of Zagor. Zagor, for anyone that doesn't know, is the Warlock from Firetop Mountain. Deathmore, Knights of Doom, Mage Hunter, Revenge of the Vampire, and Curse of the Money, which was the final book. And that's just this is just the Puffin Books run, because they stopped doing it in 1995.
Yeah, Wizards did it next.
Wizards took it up, not Wizards of the Coast.
No.
Different Wizards from 2002 to 2007. And then Scholastic have taken it over from 2010 till present, and their editions are very not anything like our editions, like in terms of art anyway.
Yeah. Fighting fantasy also spawned novels. So the Zagor Chronicles were part of that Zagor book. There was 4 of those. There was Shadowmaster, Demon Steel, and the Trolltooth Wars. Then you had the fighting fantasy role-playing game books. So the first introductory one was in 1984. So they kind of produced it at the same time they were making the other stuff. And then Titan, the fighting fantasy world, was in 86 to 89. I had the Titan book. It's really good. It's not like a role-playing. It's not like a role-playing book. It's more like a illustrated thing, kind of like Brian Froud's Art of the Goblins and Labyrinth or something like the book. Then there was Black Sand and Alancia. They haven't mentioned the Kickstarter.
So
I
think Alancia is part of Titan. So Titan is 3 continents, I believe. Alancia, which is like forest, mountains, and ruins. Kroll, which is meant to be an exotic, more darker continent, more in with unique lore, and then the old world, which is just traditional medieval European. Sorry, I just had those written down.
And of course, you've got Warlock magazine, which went along with the books the entire time.
I don't think it had a long run though. It was a pretty short run. Was it
13? most magazines that weren't like Dungeon or Dragon magazine didn't last too long. Oh, White Dwarf, I suppose.
Yeah, well, White Dwarf sort of superseded Warlock because Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston decided that it wasn't really doing what they needed to do, which was sell their product, and they were moving into other areas. I had Out of the Pit, which was the monster book for the Titan world. It was an early monster book for the fighting fantasy series, and it was cool. It was gruesome. Yeah. So what about are we done with the history? Are we dealing with anything else, or are we moving on to our next, the appeal of these things?
You can move on. Yep. That's pretty much my history of the books and everything. So
I find it funny that there was definitely a downward trend, but there were a couple of upward trends along the way, like the Return to Firetop Mountain. Well, Return to Firetop Mountain was actually supposed to be the end of the series, and it actually sold so well they decided that they could keep running, keep this run of series going for a bit longer, which was really quite amusing. Like, okay, that's why they brought Ian back, since Steve didn't want to do it, and instead they got Steve later on to do the Sorcery series, which unfortunately, even though they are probably some of the best fighting fantasy books, they didn't sell well. I think they came too late. Video games and digital button thingies were more of a thing, and people didn't want to read quite so many books back then. That this just didn't have the same appeal.
The rugby and the berry got them.
Yeah. Well, and also we were getting older too. I was, you're starting to move on. You got different interests. Sitting there with a fighting fantasy book was not quite the same as going and hanging out with girls, or just getting up to a mischief with the guys. Frankly, so it was going to lose its appeal eventually.
Yeah.
But I think, sorry,
because I started playing role-playing games as well. I think that had an influence. Like, I was getting my fantasy kicks now in a more social environment. I didn't feel the need to have the solo.
Yep,
solo
100%.
experience.
The budget was just there for role-playing books and comics, and I couldn't afford anything else, so I didn't buy any novels and stuff over that time. Modern day, we've got YouTube, and YouTube came up with the whole idea of a choose your own, pick your path sort of adventure thing. We had people on TV shows. I remember late night TV. There was a music type show, and there was a guy who would run the audience through an adventure, and at the end of that week's segment, that night segment, he would ask a question of where people wanted to go, and then he would get all the replies, and depending on who had the majority, they would go that way. So that was an interactive television experience. But on YouTube, somebody had produced for Star Trek The Next Generation, using the actor who played Gowron, the Klingon with the eyes, a interactive guide to Klingon culture, which is a fantastically weird concept, but it was really entertaining, where they would play out the scene and you'd get to choose what you do at the end of it. And so, have you learned about Klingon culture, pass this test sort of thing. And that got turned into a series of linked YouTube videos. So back in the day, YouTube used to be able to basically link, basically have multiple links on the YouTube video. These days, they just have like tags and stuff. But back then, you could have actual square link thingies down the bottom of the thing, and you click on one, and it will take you to that video. So you could do a choose your own adventure story quite easily on YouTube doing that, and you still can. But I don't see a lot of people doing it.
No, I know Black Mirror recently released one. I think it was called Bandersnatch. It was based in 1984 on Netflix. It was directed by David Slade, who's most famous for 30 Days a Night, the vampire movie. And that was really, really cool. It was set in 1984. I think you followed a computer programmer, and then you just watch it, and with your remote, you made the decisions. And Black Mirror is kind of like a fucked up Twilight Zone thing anyway, so it really suited that anthology show. And then I also think there's a bunch of kiddie ones up on Netflix. Tried to push it again, so I believe there's like a Bear Grylls one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things I think I noticed with regard to this is because I was struggling to read at school. I could actually read to a basic level before I went to school, but I got to school and they had the new whole word reading system in place at that time, where they didn't teach you the phonetics anymore, and you had to sort of just memorize the words, and it didn't work. A whole generation of people who just did not know how to read, and it worked for a tiny fraction of the population, if you ask me. We've got a whole lot of people in New Zealand who just don't have very good skills in that area. So my mum wound up getting me somebody, a tutor, who was fucking hopeless, and paid a lot of money, which they couldn't afford really. And I wound up getting just bucket loads or stacks of comic books, which I couldn't read, but I really wanted to, but I could see the pictures. So that's where I started. And then the transition from the comic books actually wound up being fighting fantasy, because they were interesting enough. So many of the books they would give to you at school to read, or that were available, were either too hard to get through in terms of the grammar and the writing style to understand, or they were too big, or they were boring. There's so much that was just so boring. John and Sally and Peter, screw them. They were so, oh my God, those early reading books were so bad. Oh my God, it's like pull teeth out. Oh, sorry, AJ.
That's an inside joke.
Yeah. But no, seriously, the fighting fantasy, that was my transition from the comic book onto an actual book, and then later on into novels, when I could finally find something that I could get through.
Yeah, I think the first novel I read was Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis.
A good book. I think probably because Final Fantasy as well, it was given to you in little bite-sized paragraphs, little sections. So you weren't overwhelmed by the idea of like, I have to read this thing from beginning to end.
Yeah, it's very approachable.
Yeah, you only had to, and so you digest that little bite-sized paragraph, and then you go digest the next bite-sized paragraph. So, and because you were driving the narrative as well, it was So
I think that's another thing that modern kids, modern whippersnappers don't realize, is that back in our day we had to contend with big blocks of text. Like the writing techniques have changed over the years, and things have become quick, blippy. So our kiddies with short attention spans can latch onto the information as quickly as possible. Get only half of the amount of information they need before forming an opinion, and then go off and create cults.
Just go to a used bookstore now and pick up a book from the 80s, man, and look at the font. Holy fuck! How did we read that?
Or newspapers back in the day, tiny text and these big chunks. And it's like, good God, how do they read this crap? Yeah. Awful.
I was looking at some of the books I read back in the day. Stephen King was another one that was. I know Fred hates horror, but I loved horror, and Stephen King was another one that got me into reading. And James Herbert as well. The Rats. He had that Rat trilogy about the apocalypse and the rats taking over.
Steel something rat.
Oh, the stainless steel rat. That's an old science fiction. Yeah,
Don't get me started on. I will rattle off authors and titles.
No, we won't do that. Let's not do that.
I'll go through the entire bookshelf that my dad had. Heinlein, Asimov.
I chewed through books. I chewed through books as a kid. Yeah, I don't know why. I didn't have many
friends. It took me a long time to get started, but once I'd read my first novel, that was it. I was off. Yeah.
I think my first novel, believe it or not, was The Bourne Identity.
Wow.
It was small enough for me to be able to get through, and it was interesting enough because it was like James Bond that I could read the first couple of pages and like, oh, okay, I can keep reading this, and I get a little bit further through, and I'm like, no, I'm not bored yet. I'll keep going, and then the next thing I know, I'm at the end of the book. It took me a while. I think it took me like a month to get through, but
once you learn that a book can hook you into it, that you can look forward to going back to the book. That's when it gets you. We had this one teacher. I've got to give a shout out to Mr. Piper in Mercury Bay Area School for actually sitting down and reading a book cover to cover to the class so that at least they have experienced a full novel. This was The Long Walk, which is a grueling story about some prisoners of war marching, to their freedom through Russia in the winter. So it's harsh, and we're sitting there in the classrooms. Like some of us were bored, and others of us were rapt. Interested in listening to the story and thinking about story structure and stuff. And then when Mr. Piper left and we got another teacher in, she was like, there were some of the students there who were obviously like me, for instance. She said, like, write a page every week. That's the only homework I want you to do, AJ, is just write a page in your book, anything you want. And so I started writing the story about, like, it was kind of like a Unseen University Wizards Academy Ankh-Morpork sort of situation, where this kid had showed up at this town because he was the seventh son of a seventh son, and he was going to learn magic, and he didn't know anything about it. And she was immersed, and then that stopped abruptly when she photocopied one of my story pages and put it on the library wall without my permission. And that was like, well, I'm not writing for you anymore. So that was that, unfortunately.
Spike Milligan taught me the joy of having a book read to you. Bad Jelly the Witch, which does not hold up politically correct now.
Oh, I don't care. I still think it's awesome.
Yeah, and he's still an influence on me now as a dungeon master. I still pull from Bad Jelly the Witch in terms of, like, I need a voice for a character.
My name is Budwiggle.
Sorry.
No, that's right. Did any of you ever read Pierce Anthony's book series? There's a lot of different.
Anthony, I know the name and I know the covers.
Just as funny stuff.
Most of his stuff is funny.
I know.
It's very, very punny. There's a lot of puns in there. Cruel Lie is my favorite one. And I was like, God, I wish this was. I love the story, but I wish I could be the hero in this the story. Because
it's funny, actually. There's this book which I'm going to share with you guys, which was written by the guy who invented the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and he wrote it. He's still alive, by the way. He's 93, and he wrote this when he was 92. If a man in the age of 92 writes a book, read it.
Yeah,
is my suggestion. And it's a series of questions, thought experiments, and one of them is, if you could place yourself in any particular game world, thing, story or book, what would it be? And I'm like, I'd be in Piers Anthony's World of Amber for sure. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Douglas Adams was my sense of humor. Hitchhiker's Guide. Terry Pratchett.
Terry Pratchett. Yeah.
Actually, we should do an episode on Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
And at some point, and Red Dwarf. I don't know how you guys feel about Red Dwarf.
I think it's one of the best. I think it's one of the best temporal sci-fi stories ever written. Like it logically works out, the whole thing. And it wasn't scared to go wildly off the rails. And also unashamedly low budget. I love that too.
So, do we have any favorites in the series of fighting fantasy? I mean, I don't mean favorites in terms of novels, but fighting fantasy, since we're here to talk about fighting fantasy.
Deathtrap Dungeon's probably my favorite, because I did Deathtrap Dungeon and Trial of the Champions and Army of Death. So they're actually, you're the same character in those three books. So Deathtrap Dungeon, you're trying to get out of the dungeon. It's full of traps. It was one of the most hardest books to get through.
Mm.
And then Trial of Champions, you ended up being a slave. It was to do with gladiator tournaments. And then Armies of Death, you raised an army. It was a very satisfying. So I think that was one of my first sort of delves into a campaign, almost like a solo campaign.
I would come home from school. I'd grab my D&D basic books, my my Manila folder, and full of my notes and stuff, my A4 pages of lined pages, and I would fill up many pages with alien species. Like I had this world called Kaitain, and it was I was directly inspired by Titan of the Finding Fantasy thing. So I had a map, I had species from different altitudes of this really weird landscape and stuff. It was real. Like I was really getting in depth with the world building and stuff because I hadn't really discovered role playing with other people yet. So I was fighting fantasying with D&D Basic. So it was really just an expansion of the rules that I'd already known. So fighting fantasy taught me role playing more than I guess just reading. Like I wasn't a complete nub. I knew what a game was, what I was getting into when I grabbed the D&D Basic book and opened it up and looked at it and went, oh, this is like fighting fantasy books, but like much more.
Yeah, I think the Deathtrap Dungeon, I wouldn't say it was my favorite, but I would say that the artwork was definitely my favorite, one of my favorites, because it was really pretty hardcore.
Yeah,
and going and collecting up all those little colored gems was such a pain in the butt when you're dealing with that labyrinth full of monsters and traps and so forth, and a few puzzles along the way.
The word Pit Fiend will forever be etched as a choose your own adventure story monster, not a D&D monster for me. So every time somebody says Pit Fiend, I have to think, right, Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
Collecting all those little gems was great. Obviously, when you're in the 80s with undiagnosed autism.
It was all undiagnosed back then, man.
Yeah. I think for me, the one that stood out the most that I really enjoyed a lot until I came across other things was the Citadel of Chaos. Also quite difficult, and you get
my least favorite cover.
It had two covers, and I would agree. The cover the cover artwork, the orange and the black sort of monster and the castle in the background didn't quite sell it for me. So it was not my favorite artwork. But you got to use magic, which was kind of the first time that there was a little bit of magic incorporated, which was nice. It was actually Freeway Fighter for me, where you had to transport oil from point A to point B in a combat vehicle, which you got to build yourself and and the world's pretty much ended. It's like Mad Max 2 vibes. And you rolled up and selected your vehicle upgrades. And I played that a lot and completed it a lot. And it was never long enough. It was always really frustrating. Like, oh, God, where's the rest of it? Where's more? And I always hoped that they would do a second one. And they never did. It sucked. But I loved.
Did you guys write in your books? Did you write or did you handwrite your character sheets out?
Yeah,
I wrote the book.
Paper.
I did write in the book.
Yeah.
The least favorite one for me was Starship Traveler, because not only was it quite a departure from the first few books, also I didn't like the cover because it would look like a rugby game. It's like there's some dudes with like glowing maces playing some sort of game versus like a robot with a blade. It's just kind of stupid looking, and the layout's not very good, and there's nothing in the background apart from like a moon and stuff, and I didn't like it. I thought it was boring.
Starship Traveler, I think, is based off the old Disney movie The Black Hole, because you get sucked into a void or a hole or whatever the heck it is, and then you have to get your ship back home. It was really hard. It was very difficult to actually complete, and you had a crew as well, so it kind of had vibes of the Black Hole, Star Trek. And it was definitely a departure. I think the problem for me with that one is the artwork really did change significantly. We didn't have that sort of hardcore sci-fi sort of feel to it.
It was a swing and a miss, that one, because that was when he was after the success of Warlock, that's when they separated, and that was Steve Jackson's one.
Mm.
That one in Citadel, he wrote at the same time.
I really like the idea of doing it. I could not get through my way through that thing. It was so hard. Steve Jackson's books were much harder than Ian's. Really difficult.
Yeah, these days, of course, you have software to write your own, choose your own adventure books. They'll organize all the pages and stuff for you, and basically just fill in the sections. So, yeah.
What do you think? So, video games pretty much killed them, you reckon?
I think it was a combination of things. I mean, I think the problem is I think the series killed itself, because when I think about the ones that I really liked, like Warlock of Firetop Mountain, it was great because it was the first one, right? And then Deathtrap Dungeon, because it was sort of hardcore in a dungeon, trying to get through it and survive with all the other competitors. And Citadel of Chaos, you were facing another wizard yet again, but I liked Freeway Fighter because it was Mad Max themed. Appointment of Fear was the superhero one where you get to play different superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of leaned into a different role. I actually really liked that one. It was fun. Then you had what was it? The Sword of the Samurai, where you had special abilities with your weapon or your sword, and you had to sort of find a special sword in the pit of shadows. But you had all these, the fast draw or the strike first, or there's all sorts of things.
So lots of new mechanics in those books.
They really were playing around with things. Even though it sounds like a terrible title, Robot Commando was one of my favorites, where you got to pilot a huge mechanized robot that was basically on a ranch, like a cowboy, that was, I guess, herding dinosaurs. And then, of course, there's a battle that takes place.
I remember that one.
I played that a lot. I think the problem is that when Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone were not writing them, the quality of those books went down a lot. And I think a lot of people who were putting these books together, they weren't very good writers. Like some of the stories they would come up with, the descriptions.
It is a very specific style of writing. You could say that Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone are well suited to writing that style of stuff, because they're writing magazine articles and things. So they're used to sort of truncating everything like a short story. But as other authors, like every writer writes differently. They have their own processes for doing it, the way that they compose it and stuff. I'm a straight from the start to the finish sort of guy. And occasionally I will skip and write a section that I want to see happen. And then I'll fit it somewhere into the book. But quite often I just go linear straight through. You can't really do that with Choose Your Own Adventure book. It would be difficult for me to write one. So yeah, having to keep all those different threads in mind as you go. But it appeals. It appeals as a challenge.
I wonder if it was similar to 2000 AD, where a lot of these writers were just cutting their teeth to get into tabletop RPGs, because I noticed a lot of them went on to work for TSR. Or do other things within Game Workshop as well, or some of them even made their own game books after this.
Yeah.
So if you look at
that was the thing. If Puffin is making money and they say, okay, this brand of titles is making money, and are you producing? Okay, well, we're going to get somebody else to make some of these because they're making us money. So that's kind of where it would come in.
That's exactly what was happening, is that they had to find other people to do it, because Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, they were busy doing other things. They couldn't keep writing one.
They were building the D&D hobby and Warhammer 40k in the UK. Yeah. Very busy.
And Puffin.
But they remained as they kept it was always their names on the books, though. The actual authors weren't on the titles. They were inside.
Yeah.
So quite often. But here's the problem. If you have a schedule, because Puffin wanted one book every 2 months, can you imagine? And it's a complicated thing to do. So these new writers coming in, quite often they had never played Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop role-playing game, or done any kind of role-playing game at all. They were novel writers. And then they were expected to sit down, draw up a map, and then map that out in a novel form. And a lot of them broke that format that Ian Livingstone and Steve were using, and they would try to write a story. Like a linear story. And that's where I started to find, because you didn't have enough choices going on. There were errors, because of the process of getting them out so quickly, they weren't checking them enough. There were quite a few errors in later books. And you turn to the a page, it directs you to go here, and it was a dead end. Like, it was not a dead end as in it was a dead end. It was taking you to the wrong place. There was a complete error. You couldn't finish the book. That happened a lot. Their artwork, the artists they got, there was a bit of backlash against them, so they changed their artists, and so you didn't get quite the same sort of artwork on the front or inside. That didn't help. I found the more and more I went through the series, the more and more I was getting frustrated with the fact they weren't presenting something that I wanted to be the hero in or the main character of. That's what I found myself. And I think that was what was happening with all of my mates at school. And I suspect probably right around the world, the same thing's happening.
Yeah. I mean, even in the early book, the Warlock on the cover looked totally different from the Warlock presented inside the book. So, I feel you there. I forgot what I was going to say. I had something on my mind, and then it's just friggin' left. The choice
it's gone. It's like AJ's gone as well. but honestly, I think the pace at which they were going at, and then eventually, because the book series was not doing that great, and every time you put out a book that's subpar, that means that your audience is like, do I really want to go back and get the next one? That was a big problem. And they were having to compete with video games and digital. Now, I don't think that that's what killed it, because the return to Warlock Firetop Mountain sold really well, and that was late in the series, and that was when video games were starting to come about. So clearly, kids and teenagers were still reading.
1992. So 10 years. It was the 10-year anniversary of the original.
Yeah, so they were still clearly reading books. It's just you had to produce good books for people to be interested, and they weren't producing good enough books.
I would have loved to have seen their like whiteboard presentation of, like, if you started there as a writer, this is how them showcasing their formula of how you go about writing it.
Yeah. And Puffin took this very seriously. This series, they were making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they actually they occasionally did bring in completely new writers where they might run a competition. I think one of the authors in one of the books, who actually turned out to be quite good later on, I can't remember his name, but he was just part of a competition. They got him to write it. He wrote it while he was in school, in college or whatever the heck it was, or university, or I think he was like 18 or 19. It wasn't a particularly good book, but the next ones that followed that he did were really good. They went and found their best novel writers to come in and write books for this series, but they couldn't do it. Their books often just did not hit the mark. It's not that they didn't throw quality writers there. It's just you can't just be a quality writer to write these things. You actually have to understand how the whole thing works, and they did not.
The sort of the early video games that came out, though, were very influenced by Pick a Path or Choose Your Own Adventure. I remember, like, the Hobbit game or Zorg. They were all those text-based RPGs that were they were pretty much, just a digital version. The trouble was, the only difference was you were typing in your answers. You had limited responses.
The directions are left, right, and Dennis.
Yeah.
You encounter a stick, pick up stick.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Take stick?
Yeah.
Give stick? Get stick. Oh, get stick. Okay, it's in your inventory.
Shove stick? Where?
Yeah. Show inventory. No, just type I. It's like, this needs instructions.
Yeah. I remember typing in some very naughty things with those.
After you installed it from a cassette as well.
Yes, ICQ. My first forays into ICQ was doing MUDs and stuff with people. That was interesting.
Oh, we've come a long way, people.
We have.
So, it's left a legacy, though. Final Fantasy, fighting fantasy. I said I knew I'd call it Final Fantasy at some point. I fucking knew I.
Final Fantasy has also got a huge legacy, but Fighting Fantasy, of course.
Yeah, we're talking about Fighting Fantasy today, not Final Fantasy.
When you look at the early building blocks of modern fantasy, I think they definitely are a foundational piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they did build quite nicely on some of the science fiction and fantasy tropes and things that were floating around at the time, and did a reasonable job. Some of them were even sort of kind of ahead of their time in some respects. But I think it's interesting that my generation really sort of accepted them, loved them, were obsessed with them. Clearly, my everybody in my college was completely obsessed. What is interesting is that Fighting Fantasy, the book series, had a lot of controversy behind it as well, right? If you think in terms of the broader aspect of it, it was a little bit like Dungeons and Dragons, because when the Dungeons and Dragons Satanic Panic started in the UK and America and probably some other places around the world, but I think America and UK were probably the big ones. I never noticed it in New Zealand, but the Fighting Fantasy book series, there were a few people who were saying, like, after my son read this book, he can now fly. And
I remember that.
That was so funny.
I need this book.
They released that. They released that into the public as a news bulletin, and of course the book sales just went up. Everybody wanted to fly.
What was the book then? It was only about $2.50 or something. So yeah, I'll pay $2.50 to learn to fly.
Yeah, thanks very much. Exactly what I wanted. Yeah.
But all right. Anything else on it? I did put something up on the socials, but you got anything else you want to go through, Fred, first?
Yeah, let's. I mean, I think that Fighting Fantasy did what it needed to do at the time. I think the book series could come back and be popular now, because although there's a lot of people who don't read books, there are still plenty of people who do, right? The problem is they would have to have people capable of dealing with this, and you just can't get a novel writer like, everybody just assumes any novel writer can go and write a tabletop role-playing game. If you've got writing skills, you can do that. You'll be fine. Like, be a game designer, sure. Write a fighting fantasy, pick a path adventure. No, it doesn't work that way. It just isn't the same transitional. It's not a transferable skill. Being able to write a sentence is not the same thing at all. So I think there is a possibility that it could come back, but they would have to have somebody who knew what they were doing, and you'd probably have to stick with them for a while, and you'd probably have to give them a bit more time. Like 2 months is too short. It's not enough time.
No way. Anything's open to nostalgia. I mean, look at vinyl.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Who thought vinyl was coming back?
Anything can come back. Magazines could come back. I mean, all these things that we loved as kids. It's I mean, people suddenly. I don't know if you've gone on to Trade Me and had a look how much people are asking for fighting fantasy books, but
they're so expensive. They are horrific.
Some people are asking like a couple $100.
Yeah. Well, because you can't get them now. They got used so much. You would go through them. It was, like one person reading it. You'd go through the book and be flipping through multiple times, flipping back, flipping forward. They really got worked hard. So I can't imagine that there are many that survived. None of mine survived. They're all gone. And
no, I had to buy the Scholastic versions.
Which is awful. God, the resurgence of fighting fantasy.
I only paid $8 for it, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, modern resurgence, bloody awful art, and a bit of a mess if you ask me.
Yeah.
But I'm glad though. At least there is a fighting fantasy tabletop role playing game. Like they designed one. It's there. You can play that. It kind of fills that niche now, and
There's also audiobooks. I've not listened to any of the audiobooks. I don't know if it's just a narrative thing or you make choices within the audiobook. I mean, that would annoy me that I have to pick up my phone and skip to a chapter while listening to something. I'd find that a little bit frustrating every 5 minutes. So I'm not too sure how that would work in that format, but I have noticed that there are audiobook versions of the original, I think, first 4 or 5 books. So,
well, you can actually get almost all of the books on an app called Fighting Fantasy, and you can play through them on your phone.
Yeah.
They cost a bit of money. You know, like I think they're like somewhere range from $7 to $15, and it's basically just an audio book, and you go through it, and the app has the pages. You select the option you want, you move on, you make decisions, and they're all there. So they're just not releasing necessarily as a
It's well loved.
print.
It is well loved.
Yeah.
I just need to let my dog, and he's scratching at the door.
No problems. You go do that.
Just looking at this latest book that I got a few years ago now from it's a Destiny Quest line, The Eye of Winter's Fury by Michael J. Ward. It's got a glossary of like 10 pages at the back of it. It's like a 700-page. Well, depends on how, I don't know how many actual pages there are. Oh, yes, I do. Let's see. So by the time you get to the final pages, it's like...
Sorry about that.
That's right.
About 800 sections on 680 pages. So it's a big, brawling, long story. And the thing is, there's no interior artwork on this apart from the occasional like little token or something. It's nothing really.
Yeah.
That apart from the map. But that's one of those ones where you. This is Destiny Quest. So you arrive at this location, and then there's a sort of castle that you're at, and then you can explore. Go to 204 if you want to go to the mountain caves, or go to 157 if you want to go and explore the citadel, or 419 if you want to go and investigate the crevice with the skeleton. So it's more of an open game world sort of thing.
So did you guys do the sorcery series, like the 4 sorcery?
I reckon when I was looking at the covers, I recognized one of the covers, which makes me think I might have played it.
Yeah.
Well, at least physically had it or looked at it, but I don't remember anything about it, to be honest. No.
So for me, I think they were probably the peak of the fighting fantasy books. They were actually removed from. They weren't actually necessarily listed as fighting fantasy. They were later brought into the fighting fantasy series, and they did not do well. But they are probably by far the best ones. Like the Shamanti Hills was the first one. Then you had the Port of Traps, and then we follow up with the 7 serpents, which you had to find the 7 serpents and kill them, and then finally the Crown of Kings, and each one of those got bigger and bigger and bigger. Like I think the first one was about 350, 400 sections, and the next one was a little bit more than that, and the next one was roughly about 400, and the last one, the Crown of Kings, was 800 sections. And Steve did all of them. He's the one who wrote all of them. And you had magic in it. The choices were substantial. The stories were really good.
The thing I really loved about the sorcery books, because I really, really, I remember them very well. The hot words, so the 3-letter hot words that make spells, like hot creates a fireball and zap creates a lightning bolt. And the fact that you could play as a wizard or a warrior. So that was really cool. That character classes, and learning spells, that was awesome.
And if you got the spell wrong, bad things happened.
Yeah. So that was all set on the World of Titan, but it wasn't. It was in Titan, but it wasn't part of the Fighting Fantasy series. They were separate, but together with them. Yeah.
But it was
very good.
Run like a campaign. So like each book led into the next one. So the first one you'd play through that, and then you'd play the next one and continue the story on, and then you just keep going. So it was a 4-book
searching for the Crown of Kings through the Shamutani Hills.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got to get the crown. I cannot believe, I don't know how many times I tried to complete that last book. Finishing the first one was easy. The second one was a little bit harder. The third one was a pain in the butt, and I didn't really like that quite so much. The last one was really hard and really long, and when I finally completed it, I remember turning the page and I got it and like, oh my god, I just completed it. It was like I could not get through Deathtrap Dungeon to the very end without dying constantly, but I got through this thing, and I'm like, wow. That was
I made it through Deathtrap Dungeon straight away, and I was really shocked that I got all the way through. Basically, just like ran a direct line and didn't stop and help anybody.
Well, that's the problem. I stopped and helped everybody and died. Like,
never do that.
Right and center. I was like, God, I got to be a complete asshole to get through this.
These books do not reward philanthropy. That's for sure.
No, they did not. Yeah. You had to be a complete Jim Chowderhead.
Well, yeah,
You've got to be
Survivor.
a pretty survivor. Yeah, if you wanted to survive, you just had to leave everybody to die on, as you went through these things.
Because most of them are like the section is designed to like hook you into it. So it's like, do you want this or do you want that? Oh, there's a shiny thing there. It could be useful. Could be a trap. You don't know.
Yeah. Boom, you did.
The sense of achievement of completing a fighting fantasy book was like, yeah, I can't wait to tell them why. Oh, well, that's right.
It's nothing compared to me beating.
I don't have any. That's why I'm doing this.
Nothing compared to me legitimately beating NetHack and gaining the amulet of Yendor legitimately. I have done that. It will be on my tombstone. It took me 300 odd games to get it done, but I did it.
Yeah.
All right.
If you look at the artwork they now have, like
no one likes a bragger, mate.
Yeah.
Hey man.
If you look at the artwork that Scholastic is now using for these books, they have a website where you can get the fighting fantasy, most of the fighting fantasy books, right? Well,
I hate the word scholastic. I don't know why. It sounds like spastic.
School. It's supposed to be school related.
Yeah.
I don't know. These educational books. Really?
Yeah. Sorry, Bruce.
But yeah, it does. It seems like oh God, read these things. You're a spastic. The
scholastic. What did you call me?
The views of individual podcasters are not the views of all the podcasters in the group.
Yeah. But the artwork on these things, the front artwork and the interior artwork is shocking. It is terrible.
Yeah, no, it is horrible. I'm looking at it here and
That cover image from the Titan World book with the dragon confronting the people on the drawbridge is one of my favorite bits of fantasy art.
Yeah.
Because that dragon is really well done. Like, it looks real. Like,
I still enjoyed playing it. I still enjoyed playing the book. It was fun.
What I don't understand is why they decided to change the artwork, because they got the rights to the art and the books to reprint.
Well, the art is iconic. The covers are part of fighting fantasy.
I think the reason they didn't use the original art is because they're stupid.
Yeah.
We have to account for the fact that there's stupid people in the world.
Yeah.
We
need to have artwork that's much tamer than the original artwork, because we don't want to upset people. But of course, if we do that, the parents are happy and the kids don't buy the books or read the book. So that's a problem, mate. Like, you gotta. I mean, come on. Those front cover pieces were not that bad.
Some of the covers of Dragon and Dungeon magazine are pretty bad.
Yeah.
So
there was a video game. I don't know if you guys remember this, called Barbarian, a Commodore 64, and that was. It wasn't Samantha Fox, but it was some other model at the time, just in a skimpy ass bikini next to a Conan-looking guy. I remember, and that was in a magazine. Like, this girl had, she had nothing on. Like, well, for me anyway, for preprocessor, we didn't have the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was no easy access to this type of material, so it's stuff back then. I think we were easily tantalized because we were living in such a drought of that type of.
It was a drab world, man. We were a bit short on entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
There was a section in the video store which usually had a curtain and a bell, and you weren't allowed in there. And there were a magazine section and certain newsagents that was up high,
above the behind the counter and up above.
And if you ever got caught looking at that section.
The plastic wrapped magazines,
apart from that, and maybe lingerie catalogs that came in in the magazine, like in your farmers.
Back in those days, we could choose your own adventure, but you couldn't choose your kink. You were assigned it by random chance.
Yeah, and just so people understand, like, we're not saying that the fighting fantasy adventures were a great, huge sexual porn fest.
No,
that you get to experience.
Porn was hard. Growing up in the 80s, porn was hard. You had to watch it on VHS late at night.
I don't know how kids these days manage to get anything done.
Yeah.
There was, you had to allow for the fact that if someone was coming, you'd have to stop whatever you were doing and pause. Yeah. It was even once you got hold of it, there were dangers.
Yeah.
It was a complicated process. So we just didn't have that availability, and our parents weren't as sexually liberated as parents seem to be today as well. Nothing was openly discussed, or Anyway, I don't know what that's got to do with fun.
I
No,
know.
I don't know.
I
I
attended
don't
some
either.
pretty wild adult parties for people who worked at the local OPC fish factory. So that was interesting. That was where I first saw my first pair of adult woman boobs. Not impressive, but shaking in the kitchen window.
So anything else on this topic before I go into the correspondence, and AJ
Well,
can
God save us. readers save us.
Can I just say, for publishers out there who think that teenagers want stuff made for teenagers, they do not.
No.
Okay.
Mhm.
You have, and look, if you can't put sex in there, fine, but put violence in there and horror, and they love it. I did. I mean, really, it was the grotesqueness, the frightening nature. It was all of that really sold me on the idea, and I was going to be getting to be part of it, and I didn't need to worry about something tearing my head off and eating me. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's a huge benefit for a teenager who thinks that they're indestructible. When you can play through a book like that and you can experience those horrors, but it's not real. Like that's what I would say. Is like go into the art, man. The art really sold those books, not just the writing. You got to do both really well.
Well, we all ended up being old men, so we actually were indestructible. It's true.
Adds to my argument for D&D, which is one of my things is bring back slavery. I think we need these. We shouldn't hide all this stuff that's offensive. Otherwise, it's still out there, and it's a healthy way to deal with it through role playing.
Yeah, I agree, because slavery is still a thing in every single country around the world, right? And you're not bringing back slavery so that players can engage in slavery and have slaves.
No,
it's to fight slavery. That's exactly trying to reprogram all those people who have spent all their time doing other things into actually fighting the things that they're terrified of doing.
Yeah, rather than being offended by it, let's fight it.
Yeah.
So
practice.
All right, we'll get to letters, eh?
Yeah.
Do you want to sing this song? I'll put it in here.
Bring the letters. Hear the call. Wizards bring them one and all.
Bring the letters. Hear the call. Wizards read them one and all. Questions from the listeners. Voices loud and clear. You can have your opinions read out here.
So I chucked up on the socials. Finding Fantasy was my first introduction to role-playing games. Do you think Wizards of the Coast should reintroduce a similar solo gamebook experience to help teach new players how to play RPGs?
They already have, and they didn't do a very good job. There is a series that they put out, and that's not great. And no, I don't want them to do it because they'll be boring.
So there was 3 here which I think are pretty much saying the same thing. Daniel Horton, I wish they would, but video games have taken over the solo RPG niche. Steve Pritchard, they were of their time and they would not have the audience amongst today's younger demographic. And Michael Dawson, do kids even still read paper books?
They do.
They do. You do. But you can't make poor quality books and expect them to be entertained. You've really got to lift your game. One of the things that Wizards of the Coast did is they made a series of these things based on some of the classes, the sort of iconic class options in Dungeons and Dragons. But the artwork was a picture of that class. It wasn't a picture of a horrible monster that they would have to go and contend with. So there's their mistake straight away. Like,
it didn't have mechanics. That was the problem. It didn't have any game mechanics.
Well, even if it didn't have any game mechanics, they still weren't written very well. I played through part of one and I was like, oh, okay. I know what this is trying to do, but it was terrible. It was not good. So
it's a watered down version of what we are used to.
Yeah.
But I think Yeah. Anyway, Steve Barnett. Hang on, I believe
Steve-
one of the early versions. No, we know that one of the early versions of the D&D starter set included a solo module to teach the game rules. Yeah, that was obviously Back Me, and that was great. That's something they should put into their player's handbook. I think. I think we've discussed this.
They got a
I
little
don't think
narrative thingy in the latest player's handbook.
Those sorts of things do best in the basic sets in the starter boxes. Like even the 4E starter box had something like that there. They even made it look like the red box. I've still got it. But yeah, no, I don't think in the player's handbook. I think it's the wrong place for it. It's the starter box. I can't count the number of people who've played D&D that I've encountered on the internet and in person, and the first thing they bought was the starter set, not the player's handbook. So.
Yeah. James Dunning says Chaosium seems to be doing well with learn to play gazebos in their starter sets, and then with the Alone Against adventures for Call of Cthulhu, I don't see why it shouldn't work for D&D.
Yeah.
So you play a lot of Call of Cthulhu, don't you, AJ? I
have dabbled.
What's Alone Against? What's that?
I'm not sure. I do know that the choose your own picky path sort of style would work really well with Call of Cthulhu, and it does have those sort of grim, like you make the wrong decision, you die sort of thing. And also it is really conducive to things like madness mechanics and stuff, which, as we mentioned before, was included in the Fighting for Fantasy books. So the framework for the rules are there. It's just writing style and plot, really, when it comes down to it. Which is usually you're an investigator. You've inherited a journal from somebody who's gone crazy. You go to the small town, which is super creepy, and derelict or something. You try and track down traces of somebody who knows about the person who gave you the information while you're reading through the thing, and then of course you come across some slavering horror from the nth dimension where bullets bounce off the thing, and that's all you got. So you die or go crazy or sort of semi go crazy, but you have to eat books to survive. That sort of thing. That's cool. It's got a definite we're all gonna die, but we're here for it vibe to it.
It's very noir, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so. But it's got a good fatalistic vibe to it. It is tragically funny. But occasionally you jump out of your chair because your friend Alex has been talking quieter and quieter for an hour as you go to a lunatic asylum, and then he gets to the bed of the guy who's supposed to have the vital information. You're leaning towards the DM, and he shouts at you manically like a crazy person, and you fall off your chair. That happened. I got him back by describing a scene of a demon summoning where the maggots were squishing through the toes of his feet, and he was physically ill. So I got him back.
Yeah, no, that does not sound...
There's a reason why I make videos like I do.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah, I can reach in and squeeze your brain.
Mally S. Stewart said he used to use the Final Fantasies as his D&D adventures. Easy to sort of convert. Unfortunately, he lost all his books in the flood. Well, that sucks.
So interestingly, I've got a thing to add to what he's just said, because it's an interesting thing he's just pointed out, because it's not the first time people have done this. So the Scorpion Swamp, if you can actually map out Scorpion Swamp as you play through, because I did. It was one of the few adventures that was basically a sandbox, and you had loops, and you could go back to places you'd already gone before. It was very directional, so it wasn't like you picked the wrong path, you did. It was like you had a path that would loop back on itself, and you could take different choices and find the information. So even if you missed it the first time, you could still get it in the same playthrough, which was really good. And somebody actually put together a map of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain and the adventure as a tabletop role-playing game that a dungeon master could run. And there were attempts to do that with some of the other adventures, but some of them are so complicated, it's a bit hard to pull off. Scorpion Swamp probably would be much easier. I think Deathtrap Dungeon would be very, very difficult and you probably wouldn't want to run it quite the way the book was run because it was ruthlessly deadly.
Yeah.
But there's certainly something to be said for taking some of the concepts that they had and just turning them into a map and adventure for your group. I think it's a great idea.
Scorpion's Swamp was, I think, one of the only fighting fantasy books that was written by an American who also is called Steve Jackson. And he
invented lots of those little pocket games like Ogre, the tank game, and Car Wars.
Munchkin.
Munchkin.
Is that who?
Yep.
Yeah. So he was visiting England. He was meant to be on a tour of England, and he stopped in at Games Workshop, and they convinced him to write an adventure, and he wrote that adventure in a day, apparently.
Yeah, right there, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's why. It's because he drew out the map. They explained to him how they do it. He drew out the map and he just built it based off the map, and so that's why it plays so well and it's so easy for you to map out, and actually made it easier for you to figure out how to complete without I'm dead, I have to start again, or I have to figure out where I came from last time and try to backtrack if I can remember where I went last time. So
and it sounds terrifying as well because fucking scorpions I don't like, and swamps. There was this big phobia in the 80s of like, did you all have phobias of quicksand back in the 80s? Like, there seemed to be a lot of like
just water. I just didn't want to go in the water.
Getting stuck in quicksand was or a swamp was a real possible thing. Maybe just
swimming in the ocean because of all the Jaws movie. Times I'd had to contend with that Jaws movie, and then Jaws 2.
Matthew Dixon. I play all my D&D books in solo mode. If you can DM, then you can and be a PC, then you can do both together. It just requires honesty and a dose of schizophrenia.
Thanks for that advice. I think I've got enough of that already. Thank you very much. Yeah,
my delusions don't need company.
Yeah,
mate, get some friends. Come on, mate.
I'm not going to get
an expensive solo adventure.
Yeah. I'm not going to give my hard time about it, but oh my gosh, yeah. I come from I work in an area where there's too many people with schizophrenia. I'm terrified that one day I will wind up in one of the rooms on that facility. So, good Lord, no.
I mean, I love Dungeons and Dragons, but there is something sad about someone playing Dungeons and Dragons by themselves as a solo player and a DM.
Yeah,
that's a whole new different level. And that's it. That's all the letters I got.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh. Anything else before we finish up?
What are we going to do next week?
Warhammer? Fantasy Warhammer?
No, there was something else we were going to do that we said.
Why don't we do your Ready Player One? Let's do your Ready Player One thing. I thought that was a fun little mess around.
I'll put it back up so that AJ. Let's just make sure we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And you called it the Realm Void or whatever, or not instead of the Oasis or whatever the heck it was.
Oh yeah, I just didn't want to get sort of like
pinged.
Not that anyone's going to sue me or anything, but
you're not making money off it.
No.
So, but if you want to make money off it, by all means, call it the Realm Void. But unless you're monetizing this thing, it's not going to really matter in the slightest.
No, not at the moment.
Yeah. I thought that was a fun sort of mess around.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. We'll do that next week.
Yeah.
Anything, AJ?
Nope, I'm good. I'll have more progress for you on the Super Atomic front when it comes in. But I have mostly completed the first expansion for the game, which is the Golden Age, kind of the period around between World War I and World War II.
Okay,
nice. So if you want to play, Prohibition era or anything like that, you can play it. Basically, it just swaps out a couple of character creation tables, and I've got a couple of cheat sheets which show like timeline of that period, interesting things that happened in history. So that you can basically convert and warp history, because there's only a few cliched things that you want to do as a player character with a superhero character in any particular time period. It's not like the modern era, and in that time period, you want to invent the first computer or fight the first robot or kill Hitler, that sort of thing. So
punch Hitler,
punch it, yeah,
kill a Nazi.
Yeah. 5 fists of justice. Yeah,
or in a modern time. Inject Bill Gates with his vaccine so that he becomes sterile.
He uploads himself to the first. Yeah,
So, yeah,
Elon Musk becomes our first AI. Right.
AJ is starting to work on his RPG, his tabletop RPG, a bit more.
Yes.
If anyone doesn't know,
yeah,
I don't know if we gave any context to what we're talking about.
it's an RP role playing game which is designed for the modern sit down Zoom call play, where you pick up you have a pub group which is called a pickup group or pug, and you don't know each other, and you don't have time to read a lot of rules or anything. You just want to pick up some dice and start playing straight away. That's what Superatomic is designed for. But although it's simple on the surface, the amount of variety and zaniness in this game is dialed up to 11, as Fred will attest.
Oh yes, which is why I'm part of the project, and why I was telling AJ, me and Wally is like, think it's time for this to move forward.
Yeah,
we're gonna help you. Let's just make it happen.
Screw you and you're working for a living. Yeah.
It could take ages before this actually gets off the ground. So yeah. So
I like to think that it's happening organically. Hopefully people start, like, they'll hear about it and they'll want to play it and they'll find out, oh, it's completely free and you can download all the files for it straight away. So yeah, you can play it right now if you want. You can just go to my Discord server and all the files are right there.
Join. Just jump. Jump on AJ's Discord.
We could even put it in the podcast Discord.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Yeah, of course. I'm pretty useless at actually advertising this thing.
Oh, don't worry about it. That's cool.
I'll make up some tables where you play characters who are wizards in spaceships.
Nice.
Easy.
Nice.
It's called The Force and Star Wars.
Yeah, and until then, maybe you can find I don't know, the fighting fantasy book, Appointment of Fear, which is where you get to be a superhero. Maybe you can play through that one.
What does fear stand for on that?
It's an acronym. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's some sort of supervillain organization that are having a meeting, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And you gotta gate crash their meeting and break it all up before they do something bad.
It sounds like something out of an Austin Powers type universe, doesn't it?
Well, it feels very much like actually it's more like Justice League. If you never played that one, it's more like Justice League or Justice Society or the Avengers or something like that. It's more like that. But you're on your own. You know, the rest of them got drunk and or died, or they're busy doing other things, and you're kind of doing the legwork to start with.
Yep. All right, awesome. All right, thanks for that. Sorry if I was a bit low energy today. I've done a lot of dungeon mastering in the last 24 hours. I'm feeling a little bit like I've talked. For some reason I've decided to run a game on a Friday and a Saturday. So just that's a lot of talking and a lot of thinking and a lot of math. But yep, got through it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It is good night from me.
It's good night from them.
It's good night from me. But isn't it
to think of a threesome?
Why are we saying good night, man? It's the middle of the day.
We start in the morning. And our days are 2 hours long at this time of year in New Zealand. So good evening.
And AJ's like body, time cycle's all out of whack anyway, so he wouldn't know what time.
Yeah. I'm on Toronto time at the moment for some reason.
Yeah. He doesn't know.
I don't know why the sun's shining.
So I quite often get up at 6 and he's still awake.
Yeah. If you see AJ having a steak for breakfast, it's not breakfast with AJ.
No. All right. Thank you, everyone.